So welcome everyone again. This is a presentation that is given to us by Karina Paliotti, a member of Dr. Ken Myers' team. Dr. Ken Myers is a pediatric neurologist at McGill, and Karina is a medical student at McGill. This has been pretty much a 2-year project that we've taken on together. And I couldn't be prouder to have Karina present to you all today the results of her research. So Karina, I'll turn it over to you. I'm muting myself. And that's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Yolaine. I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if you see the full screen. It's good. Okay, perfect. So should I wait a minute or two, or should I get started?
You can get started. As I said, this will be put on the actual PVNH YouTube channel, probably tomorrow, or if not by Monday at the latest, I'm hoping. So people can catch up at the beginning anyway. I'll be admitting people. So just so if you hear a ding, that's people that are being admitted. Okay,
sounds good. All right, so hi everyone, I'm Karina. I want to thank you for being here today. I'm happy to have this opportunity and to have been invited by Yolaine to give this talk about our study on epilepsy associated with periventricular nodular heterotopia, which we all know as PVNH. So some of you may recognize me or may have spoken to me on the phone or by Zoom while I was conducting the study. The study was part of my master's thesis, and I had started it back in the fall of 2020. So Dr. Myers, who's my supervisor, and he's here with us, he had suggested that I meet with Yolaine to explore an idea that she had proposed to him about conducting this study on epilepsy in PVNH. And now fast forward 2 years, I'm glad to say we're finally done, and we're now in the process of trying to publish this work. Okay, so the goal of today's talk is kind of to explain how we went about conducting the study and then to present our findings. So I'll start with an introduction, then I'll talk a bit about the literary review process, and then I'm going to explain our major research question, talk about how we conducted our study, the results that we got, some of our key analyses, and then I'll end off with a bit of conclusions. So I've tried my best to avoid using too much scientific jargon, just so that everyone could follow along. But if there's anything that you find confusing or you want myself or maybe Dr. Myers to talk more about, we'll have a question period at the end. Also, I want to mention that what I'm presenting today is the findings that we got from a study of a large group of people with PVNH. So the results that I'm presenting are very much generalized to our group of participants. And any specific questions that you may have about your experience or that of your child or your family member who has PVNH, they should always be directed towards your own doctor or healthcare provider, because they know your situation and your case best. Okay, so talking about PVNH. So as a little background, it's a brain malformation that occurs in utero, so that's during pregnancy. It's recognized on MRI by the presence of abnormally located nodules around the lateral, in and around the lateral ventricles. So gray matter is what these nodules are made of, and the gray matter consists of cells, which are called neurons, and also supporting cells, so other additional cells. And so the gray matter forms the outermost lining of the brain, as you see here. I hope you can see my cursor. And underneath we have the white matter, and that's just like, it's connecting the different parts of the brain. So as you can see here, we have these arrows pointing to these nodules of gray matter that appear to be displaced or in the wrong place. And that misplacement of the gray matter is thought to be caused by an error in the migration of the cells during development from the ventricles, which are at the center of the brain, towards the cortex, the outer portion, as I mentioned, during development. So the most common clinical presentation of PVNH is epilepsy. And what's thought to occur is that these misplaced nodules of gray matter, they kind of create a type of wonky brain circuitry, and that can lead to seizures. So before starting our study, one of the things that I had to do was to read about all that has been already published about epilepsy and PVNH. So after reading many articles, which I've listed down here, some dating as far back as the late 80s, there was two major points that stuck out kind of to me. The first being that many of these articles, especially the earlier ones that were published, they had concluded that epilepsy associated with PVNH is frequently drug resistant, and it's most often categorized as refractory focal epilepsy. The second point that I noticed, which adds a bit more nuance to the discussion, is that there is a variability in epilepsy onset and outcome for patients depending on the extent of their brain malformation, meaning that patients who have PVNH alone tend to have a simpler course of epilepsy compared to patients who had more extensive PVNH and other brain malformations. And this second point came from the studies that were published more in the later years. The problem here that I noticed is that with these studies, most of them only included a small number of people with PVNH in their studies, and most were actually focused on patients who had undergone surgery to stop their seizures, and that's typically used as a last resort to stop seizures. And another point was that most patients in these studies had been recruited from epilepsy centers or from hospital units, which creates a bias in their results. So considering all of this, we thought that the results that have been published to date are rather skewed towards a subset of the population of people with PVNH, and it's not really representative of the bigger picture. So with all that in mind, we came up with our research question, which was, what are the features and patterns of epilepsy associated with PVNH? Our reasoning for this question is that there's a need for a more comprehensive picture of epilepsy in people living with PVNH to be able to better manage and counsel these patients that clinicians see in their office. So our goal from here was to now recruit and interview a large group of people living with PVNH who had a prior or a current history of seizures to then be able to answer our research question. So every study has a guiding hypothesis, and this is also known as like a proposed explanation to the research question. So the results obtained from the study would then either support or refute the hypothesis. So our hypothesis was that epilepsy associated with PVNH is more often self-limited rather than refractory. So what that means is we thought the majority of the patients will present with seizures during their adolescent years, and their seizure frequency would decrease over time rather than persist throughout their lifetime. So now how we went about conducting the study is that we started with our recruitment. We did so mainly by working with PVNH Support and Awareness. So Yolaine publicized a lot about the study on her various platforms to try to get people who were eligible to participate. And we also were able to collaborate with other clinicians and researchers to recruit patients from their research databases. So after that, what we did is we collected our data. This was mainly done by reviewing participant medical records and then by conducting an interview with them by phone or via Zoom to complete a questionnaire. And then finally, once we had collected all the data, I was in charge of doing the data analyses, and the main things that we looked at were average age of seizure onset, common seizure types, epilepsy course, and response to seizure treatments. So moving to our results, we had 100 participants that were included in our study. The average age of our participants was 18.9 years old, and this was ranging from 1 month old to 61 years old. There was a slight female predominance at 58%, and the average age of our participants, when they received their diagnosis was 10.9 years old, and most of our participants had been diagnosed with PVNH after the onset of their seizures. So with our 100 participants, we subdivided the group into smaller subgroups based on the extent of their malformation. As I mentioned, that's what had been done in the previous studies, and that's what made most sense to us. So we had our PVNH only group, and that's participants that had PVNH alone with no other brain malformations. And then we had our PVNH plus group, and these are the participants that had PVNH and other brain malformations. Then within those groups, we separated our patients who had one nodule from those who had multiple nodules. And then for those with multiple nodules, we then separated them based on whether the nodules were present unilaterally, so on one side of the brain, or bilaterally, which is on both sides of the brain. So here I put a panel of MRI images, and these are examples of our participants and how we classified them into the subgroups. So in A, we see the MRI of a participant with PVNH only who had a single nodule, pointed to by the red arrow here. In B, we have a participant who had PVNH only with multiple nodules. So as you could see, they have the two arrows on the right and the left, pointing to both the nodules on both sides. Then in C, we had a participant with PVNH plus who had one single nodule of heterotopia, of gray matter. And they also had a thin corpus callosum and cerebellar hypoplasia, which are both kind of signs of underdevelopment in these other two structures. So it's considered like coexisting malformations in this participant. Another last example was of a PVNH plus participant who had multiple nodules. So as you see in E, pointing on both sides of the brain, there were presence of nodules on the right and the left. And then in F, we see that there's an arrow pointing to a hypothalamic hamartoma, which is a benign tumor that is growing in another part of the brain, or present in another part of the brain. So just to give some numbers to all of this, we had 39 participants in our PVNH only group and 61 participants in our PVNH plus group. Now within each of these two major groups, for PVNH only, we had 18 participants with a single nodule here in blue. We had 4 participants with multiple unilateral nodules in yellow, and 17 participants with multiple bilateral nodules in pink. For the PVNH plus group, we had 8 participants with a single nodule, 20 participants with multiple unilateral nodules, and 33 participants with multiple bilateral nodules. So moving on to our analysis, here I've really included our key findings. So as I mentioned, we're trying to publish this work, and if you are interested, we're working on an article which gives more in-depth descriptions of our results. For the PVNH only group, the average age of seizure onset was 9.6 years. Focal seizure types were most common. Focal seizures are seizures that start in one area on one side of the brain and generally affect one part of the body. Pharmacoresponsiveness was reported in 61% of participants that had a single nodule, meaning that 61% of that subgroup had their seizures well under control with their anti-seizure medications, which is an important finding. And lastly, there were no participants in this group of participants with single nodules that had drug-resistant epilepsy, which is also a significant finding. Moving towards the PVNH plus, we had participants on average had seizure onset around 6.9 years. Bilateral onset, possibly generalized seizures were most common, these being generalized absence seizures, the bilateral tonic-clonic seizures. The pharmacoresponsiveness was reported in 55% of participants with unilateral nodules, which again is a good proportion of participants in this subgroup who had their seizures well under control with their medications. And the highest proportion of drug resistance epilepsy was in participants who had bilateral nodules, and this was 39%, and that was the highest percentage across all subgroups, including the subgroups of PVNH only as well. And in terms of response to treatments for seizures, I didn't write it in here, but we only had 14 participants who had undergone surgery, and the results post-operatively were quite mixed. And then in terms of anti-seizure medications, we noticed that PVNH plus participants tended to have to undergo multiple trials, a greater number of trials of medication compared to PVNH only participants before trying to achieve seizure freedom. But overall, there was no specific medication that stood out or showed particular benefits for a large amount of our participants. So now to summarize the main points from our research. So for seizure onset, we noted that for our cohort, it was 9.6 years old for PVNH only and 6.9 years old for PVNH plus. Both of these groups had large standard deviations, so that implies that there's a lot of overlap between the two. And so what we could say generally is that epilepsy typically presents around the end of the first decade of life. A second point on seizure patterns, they're highly variable between patients. So we saw that focal seizure types were common across the board, across all groups. And we also noted that PVNH plus participants were more likely to have bilateral onset seizures compared to the PVNH only participants. And then in terms of epilepsy course, we say that it may be predicted to an extent by the precise pattern of malformation. So patients we saw with isolated single nodules, so these are PVNH only patients with single nodules, are more likely to have self-limited epilepsy. So the epilepsy can be well managed with or without anti-seizure medication. And then for PVNH plus patients, those with bilateral nodules and also other malformations, they may have more difficult to treat seizures. And overall, what we could say is drug-resistant epilepsy occurs in a minority of individuals with PVNH. I know this is something that's a cause for concern for patients and parents when they receive their diagnosis. Many parents who I spoke to during their interviews had expressed concern about this. But what we could say based on our findings is that drug resistance is not the most common outcome for individuals with PVNH. So now to conclude, the results that I presented today are really based on the data that was collected from the 100 individuals that were included in our study. In doing so, our goal really was to raise more awareness about epilepsy that's associated with PVNH and to give you all more information about the possible outcomes, which we see are rather broad. And from what we know, this is the largest study to date focusing specifically on people with PVNH and epilepsy. Our findings highlight the importance of a proper assessment for patients when PVNH is identified. And patients should always be counseled about the increased risk of seizures. And also their MRIs should be reviewed and reported by experienced specialists so that their distribution of PVNH is properly defined, because as we saw, epilepsy course can be predicted to an extent by the pattern of their malformation. So with that, I'd like to say thank you for your time, and we'll open the floor for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Karina. This is fantastic. We're so grateful to you and to Dr. Myers for accepting to take on this project with us. Before we open it up for question, maybe can I turn it over to you, Dr. Myers? Is there something that you'd like to add to the presentation? And if not, then we can go straight to questions.
Thanks again, Yolaine, for the opportunity to talk to all of you. No, I don't have much to add. I just want to again thank everyone who did help by participating in this, because it is really hard to get such a large group of patients together. I think it says a lot about the community of people with PVNH. But yeah, that's really it. So and I'm happy to help with questions.
Thank you. So I'll add one more thing. I mean, like I've said it at the beginning, this has been a 2-year project. It was in the summer 2 years ago that, or actually maybe even before that, I think it was Rare Disease Day just before COVID in 2020 that I went to meet with Dr. Myers. And from there, it took over 2 years for us to get here to the presentation and to the publication, hopefully very soon, of the presentation. And so for our PVNH families and our PVNH community that's listening, this is what we can do when we come together with our registry, with data, with me taking the lead and being able to work with our collaborators across the world. And as Karina said, this was not only our PVNH community, but there were also other researchers that Karina and Dr. Myers reached out to that participated in this study. And I think, that's what I've seen as well. I'm fairly certain that this is the largest PVNH and epilepsy study that's been done to date. And so this is fantastic for us as a community. And it's going to be really important that we don't lose this momentum and that we hopefully can, grow on this research to even go further into the hypothesis and the answers that we've gotten from this study. So if you want to raise your hand first or just speak up. I know, Emma, you just unmuted yourself, so I'll turn it over to you all for questions, either to Karina and or to Dr. Myers. Keep in mind that specific PVNH questions related to your family should be discussed with your medical professional, as they know your history better than within this context. Thank you. Any questions? Emma, do you have a question? You unmuted yourself. Okay, I guess not.
Maybe I'll just add one thing,
Yeah.
Yolaine. I think once this is published, we'll the important thing after that is to try to make sure that the information gets out in the medical community. So we'll certainly, use Twitter to tweet a link, but I think it'd be really great if you, I don't know if you have an email list, but you could send around a copy of the article, and people can bring it when they're seeing their neurologist. And yeah, I think that could be helpful for getting the information out there.
Absolutely. This is a great point, actually. We, with the other research that we've done, we've had like this one, this is recorded. It's going to be on our PVNH Support and Awareness YouTube page. And the actual papers is usually shared with our community, but also I'm sending it out to our experts around the world so that they are keeping aware of what we've done. Just like, the invitation to participate in this research was sent out to them, in the same way, the results will be also shared with them. There may be a way, and I'm stepping out of bounds here, but some people might not be comfortable asking question in a public forum. So is there a chance, and please, say no if that's not possible, because I know it adds to your workload, but is there a way that people could email you if they have questions about the presentation that they've seen today?
Yeah, that's definitely fine. And I think most people probably already have my email address. I do get a lot of emails, so I do my best. Sometimes it takes me a little bit longer, and sometimes I might need a reminder, but I certainly don't mind getting those emails, and I do my best to answer questions.
And I could act as a go-between as well. So if you have questions and you feel comfortable sharing them with me, I can certainly pass them on. Jody has a question. So Jody, please go ahead.
Hi, Yolaine. Thank you to you both. We were involved very early on and unfortunately didn't actually add ourselves to the study, but kind of wish I did now. And I apologise for that. Our boy was very young, and we felt that was a decision that should wait. For us, our question would be, he's 13. Did you get a sense in this plus category, which our boy would be in, was there a sense of any common conditions? He's got a Rathke's cleft cyst. And I just wondered if there was, when they were looking at the additional conditions with epilepsy, was there some that were quite prevalent versus others? Thank you.
Do you want to take that, Karina, or would you like me to?
Yeah, sure. So what we looked at, in addition to just focusing on PVNH, was we had kind of collected data on what other types of brain malformations were present in our PVNH plus participants. So we do have a bit of an assessment as to what is more common findings. So whether it's a cyst or a kind of dysgeuria or another type of malformation of cortical development. So we do have that in our data, but we don't have, if you're talking about a specific syndrome or a specific other condition that can be associated to it, we haven't put that data together, if that answers your question.
I guess just with respect to, the specific other malformations that could go with PVNH, I think we mostly saw a pretty big range. I wouldn't say there was any one or two things that really came out as being consistently associated.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, that's what I was wondering. I heard the word cyst and it just piqued my interest.
Thank you. Gigi has a question. So Gigi, go ahead and unmute yourself.
I don't remember what my question was.
If you remember what it is, maybe you can put it in the chat.
Yeah, if I remember, I'll put it in the chat.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yep.
Do we have any other questions? Specifically on the presentation? So I guess I have one. And again, I'm putting you both on the spot, Karina and Dr. Myers. So where do we go from here? You know, this was made possible because of your generous support, Dr. Myers, your team, the McGill, research team. How do we go forward as an organization with the results that we have? Is fundraising for research in our community enough? Do we need more patients to come forward? I know you have a registry now that you've started, just like ours, that's now part of the McGill research registry for PVNH. Can you talk to us maybe a little bit about that? Like, because as a leader, for me, it's a way to help our community understand the positive impact of research and what that means.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to go from here. For one, the underlying cause of PVNH is still not that well understood. We think probably most of it is probably related to genetics somehow. Not all, but most. Karina we have a little bit of data on genetics that Karina didn't include. So in the study, we learned, I think, a bit more about the genetic causes, but there's definitely still more work to do in first figuring out which genes are associated, and then figuring out like sort of the molecular pathways that lead to PVNH, and how this would eventually help. It would allow us to tell people if what their risk for having children with PVNH might be, and eventually it might lead to more targeted treatments for PVNH. So I think that's an area that really can be a next step in improving the care for people with PVNH. Another thing that's really a completely different area is in the treatment. And I think we've sort of seen with Karina's study that actually probably a bigger percentage than we thought could be controlled with medications. But there is still a good percentage that have very difficult to control epilepsy. And trying to figure out how to best help those people is really important. I think that is probably going to involve some collaborations with neurosurgeons, because for the patients that can't be controlled with medication, surgery can often be a really good option. But I think we still don't really know the best way to do that. And there's been some really good work done at the Montreal Neurological Institute, which is just a kilometer or two from here, on the adult side. But I think working with neurosurgeons and trying to find new and better techniques will be another area to really work on.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Did we touch upon everything that you wanted to hear today, or you may need again some time to reflect on what you've heard, and when I post it, review this, and would rather email questions? I'm going to wait a few minutes. for just about a minute to see if anybody is willing to ask any questions. No. Okay. Karina, any last words? Dr. Myers, any last words? Is there anything that I haven't asked as a leader that, or, any more tidbits of information you think that might be of interest, not only for our community, but perhaps to our different experts around the world who may be catching this presentation on YouTube later, that would, jig their desire to work with us?
I mean, it's clear from, like as Dr. Myers said, that you have a good community. You guys are big in numbers and a lot of you are really well implicated. I got to speak with many people part of the PVNH Support and Awareness group, and that was really awesome. So strength in numbers, and I think if you keep doing what you're doing, there's a lot more positive things that could come out of it.
I just saw a question come in from Michael. So let's see if I can, yeah, Michael, I know Michael's from Germany, and let's see. Karina, are you able to read the question? If not, I can try and read it. So he said he's not 100% sure if it's PVNH. He got his diagnosis at 40, around the age of 40. Again, Michael, that might be a question directly for your team, but we'll look at it. Striking our bilateral intraventricular epimendymal trigonal. So yeah, Dr. Myers, are you able to read it?
Yeah, so the question is sort of what is the function of the trigonum?
Yeah.
To be honest, I'm not sure if that's a Google Translate issue. I'm not
might
sure exactly. That maybe just a different name for a structure, but I'm not sure exactly what that refers to. But yeah, certainly I would say if Michael, if you want to send me an email, I can try to answer your questions as best I can.
I'll make sure to pass on your email address to Michael. And in fact, if you're okay, Dr. Myers, I could put, and Karina, I'm not sure if that's the same for you as well, but under the presentation with a little write-up, is it okay to put it there as well on the YouTube page, or no? Would you prefer that I keep it private?
I'm okay with my email.
Okay, perfect. We'll start with that. Wonderful. Is there any other questions specifically about the presentation? I'll say for myself, I mean, to me, to have the PVNH plus really divided and explained, and to see the differences between the unilateral, the PVNH only, and the PVNH plus, I think it's huge. There's been very few that I've seen papers that address that. And I think that's going to be more and more of a need because, as you said, Karina and Dr. Myers, I believe you might have alluded to that as well. There's so many differences in PVNH. And so I think that's going to be extremely important that we're able to, as a community, continue to pursue research, especially for those with epilepsy, considering so many have an impact of epilepsy, and to be able to define what kind of treatments in the future will be best for different types of PVNH. So
Emma just put a question in the chat. So it's going to be the talk will be posted online.
yes,
and yeah, you can email me a question if you do have anything that comes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll make sure to relay questions if they come through me, or Dr. Myers will have his email under the video that's going to be posted on our PVNH Support and Awareness YouTube channel. So, okay. So Dr. Myers, was there anything else? Because I've spoken a few times, I've interrupted you. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
No, just to reinforce that for rare and relatively rare diseases, it is possible to do research like this, but it really does involve it requires the community to really be engaged and be up for participating. So just again, thank you for everyone who did, and hopefully you'll continue to participate in other research projects in the future. But it's really appreciated.
You know what, this is huge for us. I mean, like right now in Australia, we're going into, it's August 7th. In New Zealand, today is August 7th. It is World PVNH Day. So I thank you both, because it's 9:30 in Montreal. It was 6:30 in Vancouver when we started, where I am. It's so important that we have the collaboration of experts and people that want to get involved and help us learn as a community about what's happening with, you know, our different symptoms and what we can do, whether on a genetics or a treatment standpoint, to be able to help the community. So I want to thank everyone that was here this morning to listen into the presentation. And I want to again say a huge thank you and a congrats to both Karina and Dr. Myers for everything that they've done for us in the last 2 years. This is huge. And I'll repeat it, this was made possible because of the team, Dr. Myers' team, and not because we had, we didn't contribute anything. So in this case, we really lucked out, because to be able to do research, it's usually a big, and that's going to be the case for the future, but usually you have to fund it. And we do have funds, but this one was taken on by McGill and the research, and we're super grateful for everything that you've done for us. Thank you. So if that's it, then I will close it off today. And yeah, I see a few messages of thanks coming in, and maybe when the paper is out, if there's a need for a further presentation, maybe we can look into that as well. Sounds good. Sure. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you, Yolaine.
Bye. Happy PVNH Day.
Happy PVNH Day.